Meet our free US tax preparation course brought to you by the Borderless Accountant. We are inviting you to join our community. Live training, reputable tax firms as resource speakers, recorded replayable at higit sa lahat, libre. To join, like and follow our official Facebook page, join our Facebook group for important updates, and fill out our Google form to be included in our mailing list. See you there!
So this is a continuation of the lesson on various tax forms. Now, we are going to be talking about the various 1099s. So 1099 is a very common among taxpayers. First, we're going to talk about the 1099 INT, or this would be for interest income. Then 1099 DIV, this is for dividends. 1099R for retirement income. 1099 SA is for Social Security benefits. 1099B for capital gains. 1099S for sale of property. 1099 MISC is miscellaneous. This would be usually for rents or royalties. And I talked about it earlier, the 1099 NEC, or the non-employment compensation. Now let's go through INT. This is the interest. So usually this is issued by banks. If the taxpayer has a significant amount of deposit during the year, and those deposits are interest bearing, end of the year, the bank will provide the taxpayer this form, which would be the total of the interest income for the year. Right? So when you enter this into the tax software, just follow the numbers or the box numbers. So box 1 for interest income and any penalty, any investment expenses, and so on and so forth. Your Q is the box number, and most often than not, you'd only have box 1 really, based on my experience. INT is very straightforward. It only has a number on the first box. Sometimes, or very rarely, you get withholding and some penalty for early withdrawal, but again, it's very rare. Next would be DIV. So this DIV stands for dividends, obviously. This is usually, or this is most often than not, issued by a broker. Pause ka lang. Oh, did I just... Yeah, on the 1099 INT, I mentioned that it's usually issued by banks, which is about 95% correct. But there are instances where you get an INT from the IRS itself. So how does that happen? Remember, I told you that the IRS is very efficient in terms of sending out refunds. In cases where there is a delay in the refund, or there was a mistake on the end of the IRS will send you, or the taxpayer, an interest compensation. So the IRS sends the taxpayer a 1099 INT. That's how great it is. And I don't think we've ever going to be encountering that in the Philippines. So that just goes to show how efficient the IRS is. And also, I just learned from a conversation I had with Sam Asu. When they talk about tax strategy, you would want the taxpayer to pay as little tax as possible, right? And you also don't want the taxpayer to have as big of a refund, right? Because if the taxpayer is getting a refund from the IRS at the end of the year, essentially the taxpayer is lending money to the government interest free. You know what I'm saying? So as a tax professional, when I was or prior to that conversation with Sam, I would always view refund as a as a good thing, right? Especially if it's a huge refund. But if you look at it closely, it's actually not good again for the taxpayer because that's money that's being lent to the government interest free. So that money could have gone to some form of an investment by the taxpayer, right? That could have earned some return. But then again, because whatever the reason why there's a refund, there could be, over withholding or overpayment of estimates. Um, those are not really a good tax strategy, again, because it's not making a good use of the resource of the taxpayer. So yeah, I just felt like I needed to insert that for you guys to understand um, that the IRS essentially is a government agency, right? So that's how the government gets its fund to finance its uh, activities. So when a taxpayer sends or um, when a taxpayer receives an interest payment from the IRS, don't be surprised. It is an income and it is taxable. Okay, so it's just like receiving a 1099 INT from the bank. But then again, it's not very common. Right, let's continue. I know the audio is terrible. You have to bear with it. This is the max volume I could get. That's why I shared this with you guys, the link I shared with you, so you can watch it on your own computer and play around with the volume. For those who haven't seen it and still are having difficulty hearing it, I am repasting the link on the chat box so you can watch it later. All right, so let's continue. 1099s. So this is the interest. So you interest bearing. At the end of the year, the bank will provide the taxpayer this form, which would be the total of the interest income for the year. Right. So when you enter this into the tax software, just follow the numbers or the box numbers. So box one for interest income and any penalty, any investment expenses, and so on and so forth. Your Q is the box number. And most often than not, you'd only have box one really, based on my experience. INT is very straightforward. It only has a number on the first box. Sometimes or very rarely you get withholding and some penalty for early withdrawal, but again, it's very rare. Next would be DIV. So this DIV stands for dividends, obviously. This is usually, or this is most often than not, issued by a broker. So in this case, the broker or the payer's name is Charles Schwab, and the dividends is broken down into ordinary, capital gain. Some would have 1099A, and some would even have foreign tax paid. So again, like any other 1099, we just follow the sequence on the box number where to input. So if there's no amount on a certain box, you just skip those and just enter those that are applicable in the form. Right? So again, this is for dividends. Next form is 1099 SA. I'll have to correct myself earlier. SA is not for Social Security benefits, but this is a distribution for HSA, MSA. Usually this is health care investment. So, and this is issued by a financial institution, typically a bank. And just like W-2 and the other 1099s that we have discussed, your Q in entering this into the tax software, just following the MSA. Usually it is. Right, so let's just go back to 1099 div. So common thing that you see on a 1099 div is the ordinary dividends and the qualified dividends. So most often, the ordinary dividends and the qualified dividends are of the same amount. But there are times wherein the ordinary dividends, which is box one, is higher than the qualified dividends on box 1B. That's because some ordinary dividends, that's the most common dividend that's paid by corporations. But for qualified dividends, these are subject to a lower tax rate, and not all dividends are qualified dividends. So, example for a dividend to be qualified, it must be paid by a U.S. corporation, or if it's a foreign corporation, there are some qualifications. All right, and there are restrictions in terms of days that the taxpayer has held the security. You don't need to know the nitty-gritty of qualified and ordinary dividend, but one thing you need to know is that qualified dividend will be lower than ordinary dividends. So ordinary dividends is what usually gets taxed on the tax return, but you still have to enter what the qualified dividend amount is. Actually, everything that you see on a 1099 div, you will have to enter that in the tax software. The section 199 gain, the capital gain, if there is an amount. Most importantly, the foreign tax credit. That's the usual thing that get missed by a tax preparer, the foreign tax credit. How does it work? Because you are receiving this from a broker, right? So if you happen to invest in securities outside of the US, right, and that security paid dividends some point during the year, most likely that dividend has already been taxed, meaning, say for example, the you invested in the London stock market, right? So there was a security bought in there, and then that security paid you a dividend. So the London government or whatever the tax authority they have will withhold a certain amount from that dividend payment, right? So that would be considered as a foreign tax credit, which if there is a significant amount of investment, it's going to help it's going to help the tax situation of the client. I don't see it, a lot of foreign tax credit that's significant, but regardless, if it's there, you'll have to input that because it's a dollar for dollar deduction on the tax of your client or whoever tax return you're preparing for. So even if it's just $1, $2, $3, you still have to input that because that is actually a $3 deduction on the tax due of your client. Okay? Clear so far? Do you have any question? So again, don't forget to enter foreign tax credit on a 1099 div. Enter those that are applicable in the form, right? So again, this is for dividends. Next form is 1099 SA. I'll have to correct myself earlier. SA is not for Social Security benefits, but this is a distribution for HSA, MSA. Usually this is health care investment. So, and this is issued by a financial institution, typically a bank. And just like W-2 and the other 1099s that we have discussed, your cue in entering this into the tax software, just following the box numbers. And this is an HSA, so when you enter this into the tax software, just mark the box HSA. It's a very straightforward form, just like any other 1099. Next 1099 is all right, on 1099 SA, it's for health. Usually it's health for HSA, health savings account distribution. Most common mistake naman here with HSA, especially for new tax preparers, is that the amount is not marked as a distribution for for medical purposes. So usually you would not know, right, if that distribution was used for qualified medical expenses. Um, but you have to ask, right? So you have to ask if you have access to your client via the portal or via the CRM. That's one thing that you would need to ask or confirm if that amount was used for qualified medical expenses. And then you'll have to mark that in the software as such. Because if not, then it will incur an interest and a penalty from the IRS. Okay, because it's a health savings account is a tax deferred vehicle, right? So they contribute into that account and then they get tax deductions, right? So when they withdraw from that account and it's not for medical purposes, then it gets taxed because again, when they contributed that money, they benefited from a tax deduction. All right. So um, make sure that you ask or you confirm. What I would usually do is if I see something like this, I would mark it right away as medical expense, but I just have to confirm, right? So I don't forget. So by default, I would mark it as if it's for a medical for a qualified medical expense. But then at the end, when I gather all my open items and send it to the client, sometimes I send. It depends on the arrangement, right? If I don't have access directly to the client, I'll send it to the person I'm working with, right? If it's the reviewer, if I'm a preparer and then I have a reviewer, I will send those open items to the reviewer. And then specifically for HSA, I will put there confirm that the HSA distribution was used for qualified medical expense, just like that. Okay, moving on. Just like any other 1099. Next 1099 is 1099B for capital gains. This is slightly complicated, but not so much. Some would have a difficulty entering these because like in here you have short term and long term, right? And there are sub classification, whether this is box A or box B. You know, base is reported to the IRS for box A, and then base is not reported to the IRS for box B. And same with the long term. And if you look at it, this is the summary of box A, 16,399.50 in this example, but this could be composed of several stocks, right? So there could be breakdown. But in practice, what we usually do is just take the entire amount and then we attach the breakdown of the stocks and or as a PDF for, if I remember it right, for a Pro Series tax software. But for UltraTax, I don't really recall having attached the breakdown. But this is your Q, your proceeds cost, and then if you do the summary entries, because there are different dates of purchase of those stocks and the different dates of when they were sold. So we just use various for those dates. Maybe this will not, like going through this one right now would not make sense to you. But later on, when we start entering 1099B into the tax software, it will make more sense to you. This one is just a preview of the form. Next would be a 1099B and a 1099 div, they're interrelated, right? When you become a tax preparer, you will notice that most of your clients will have these, right? Because most Americans, they are invested in the in the U.S. stock market, right? So if you don't know how the stock market work, I think I've discussed this before. It also you can also do the same thing in the Philippines, right? But it's just not common. Not a lot of Filipinos are invested in the stock market, right? So because to begin with, not a lot of Filipinos can afford to invest, right? Most of us, whatever we earn, we spend. And sometimes whatever we earn, whatever we save, we put them in the bank. We're not financially literate on where we can put our money into, some investment vehicles. So stock is a very common investment for Americans other than houses. So first, if they earn good amount of money, they qualify for a housing loan. So they take a loan, and then when they start investing, they look into stocks. So they start looking at stocks, and that's when they start getting dividends. Um, Dividends are income that they receive from the companies where they're invested their money into, and usually they hold it for a long term, right? If you're a long-term investor, you would get dividends. But if sometime during the year you sold your position, right? So say for example, you bought a stock of Apple, right? Beginning of the year, you bought an Apple stock, and then uh, say in June you needed money, right? Or you felt like you want to cash in the gain because like you bought Apple at say $100, just for example, and in January, and in June it rise up to, let's say, $120 per share. So there's already a $20 gain per share, right? And you want to cash in on that. So you will sell the stock, right? From 100 you bought, you would sell at 120. So that 20 per share is a gain, right? And that is called a short-term gain, right? Short-term because you sold the stock in less than 12 months, right? So if it's less than 12 months, say for example, even if you bought it, let's say November of last year, and then you sold it in January of 2025, that would still be short term, even if it crossed a year, right? Because if you look at it, you bought it less than 12 months ago, right? So that's short-term gain, or it could be short-term loss as well, right? If you bought it, let's say 100, and because you needed the money, you sold it for like 90, because at that time the market was, trading Apple at $90 per share. So you lose $10 per share. So that could be a short-term loss, right? And a long-term gain would be more than 12 months, right? So for example, you bought Apple stock January of 2024, right? And then you needed money, or again, for whatever reason, you sold the stock and you sold it, let's say, at any time in 2025, because you bought it in January of 2024, anytime after January 2025, that would already be long term, right? So if you sold it or if your client sold the stock in February onward of 2025, that would already be considered as a long-term gain or a loss. Okay? You understand the concept of short-term and long-term? Short-term, less than 12 months, long-term, more than 12 months. And why do you need to know this? Because in the broker statement, it will be classified there what's short-term and what's long-term. Further, because there is a different tax rate for a short-term gain and a different tax rate for a long-term gain. Yung long-term, lower yung tax rate. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's about 25% tax rate on capital gain, long-term capital gain. Pag short-term naman, higher, which usually follows the tax rate ni taxpayer, right? So if the taxpayer's tax bracket is, let's say, 30%, a short-term gain is also taxed at 30%, okay? But the long-term gain is always going to be at 25%. You get me? And then there will be more complications on the long-term gain, short-term and long-term capital losses, because there will be what you call as carry forward, but we'll tackle that on another discussion. So we'll deal with the simple stuff muna today. Okay? So I hope you learn what's a short-term gain or short-term loss, a long-term gain, or a long-term, specifically capital loss or capital gain. Okay? My question, just type it in the box, okay? Next would be 1099 NEC. I briefly touched on this earlier. This one is just a preview of the form. Next would be 1099 NEC. I briefly touched on this earlier. NEC again stands for non-employee compensation. So we don't normally enter it as it is. This is a supporting document towards a Schedule C or a self-employment income, which we will also tackle later on. Some software actually allows us to enter 1099 NEC as it is, and then we link it to a Schedule C. Now, you rarely would see federal income tax withheld because, like what I said earlier, if you're a contractor, you're responsible for paying your own taxes. Okay. And when is it issued? If you are a contractor and you earned $600 or more from that company or client of yours, then the company will have to issue you a 1099 NEC. If the earnings is below 600, then there's no requirement to issue a 1099 NEC. All right, next would be a 1099 MISC. So MISC is right. So 1099 NEC, you would also see this a lot, right? So in lieu of a W-2 is NEC. So if you're not employed, but you're employed as a contractor, you will get a 1099 NEC. Do everybody get the NEC? Not really, because again, if you earned less than $600, the company that you're working for may not give you an NEC statement. But can they? They can, right? It's just not a requirement, okay? And the difference again between a W-2 and NEC is that you're still technically employed. However, your employer is not required to pay or withhold taxes and will not pay the FUTA taxes, the Social Security and the Medicare, right? So, you know, it's advantageous to the company that you're working for because it will not cost them money, right? Because remember that for Social Security and Medicare, they have counterpart payments on that, just like how our employers provide counterpart for like our Social Security or for our SSS and for PhilHealth and Pag-ibig, right? So we contribute to those institutions, but our employers also do their counterparts. The same thing with the US, right? So if you start working for firms in the US as tax preparers, you will be hired as a contractor, unless may Social Security or ITIN kayo, right? Because they cannot issue you a 1099 NEC even if you are sorry, for one, they cannot hire you as a W-2 employee. They cannot. Why? Because you are not a US citizen, you don't have a social or an ITIN. So no way that we can be hired as a W-2 employee even if we work for the company and we're based in outside the USA, right? Can we be hired as a contractor? Yes, that's the usual agreement. And will they be issuing us a 1099 NEC because we're a contractor? The answer is no, because we don't have social. We're not reporting our taxes to the IRS. Okay, but can they? Yes, they can, right? If you have an ITIN, then you can apply an ITIN in the US. There's a lot of requirements though, but you can. So in that case, usually what employers do is they withhold taxes on your 1099 NEC. So that's the time you will see a withholding amount on the 1099 form. Happy so far? I hope I made a good job at emphasizing the 1099 NEC. Moving on. Is for miscellaneous. So it could be for rent, it could be for royalties, it could be for other income. And just like other forms, when we enter this into the tax software, we take the Q on the boxes numbers. So rent goes to a Schedule E. Same with royalty. Other income, I will show you on a different lesson where to input it. Okay, because it varies according to the tax software that that's being used in the tax preparation. Next would be a 1099-R. This is for retirement. So box 1 would be for the gross distribution, and then the taxable amount for box 2, and then usually you can see amounts in the federal gross distribution. Next would be a 1099 according to the tax software that. Right. Just a bit of emphasis on MISC. Is this a common document? Yes. It usually is related to rents. So again, most of Americans, they invest in second houses, right? So they have a primary house where they live, and then once they start earning good amount of income, they invest in another property and then they rent it out, right? And then usually when they rent it out, there is a rental property management who will facilitate the rental, right? And at the end of the year, that rental property management will send the taxpayer the 1099 MISC to provide a summary of how much rent the property earned during the year. Okay, so is it always the case na may 1099 and MISC for rent? Not really, because some rental properties are directly managed by the taxpayer. Let's say, for example, pina-Airbnb niya, right? Or siya mismo nagmamanage. Hindi niya nilagay sa isang property management company. Then that taxpayer will not get a 1099 MISC, right? So usually lang, MISC, the client or the taxpayer gets that if yung property is managed by a property management company. Okay? And then there are also times na yung box 2 ang may laman, no? MISC for royalty, right? Usually royalty, you know what royalty is, right? But in some cases, like here in the US, kung yung taxpayer ay may property, and then that property is, say for example, may oil and gas exploration dyan sa property na yan, where the taxpayer that the taxpayer own, the oil and gas company will send the taxpayer a 1099 MISC for the royalty on the property. It could also be other income, really. Any other income that's not rent, it's not a contractor income, not royalty. They put it in other income, right? So, trivia lang, before, yung NEC was also, there was no 1099 NEC. So yung self-employment income is also in the 1099 MISC marked as other income. But only very recently that the IRS separated that form, particularly only for contractors. Okay? So, careful with this, yung 1099 MISC, careful with putting other income in Schedule C, because remember, not remember because we haven't covered this yet. But if contractor income kasi, that will flow through the Schedule C. And if it flows through Schedule C, it will be subjected to a self-employment tax, which is 15.3%. But if it's in a 1099 MISC marked as other income, there is a specific provision of that in the tax form, and it will not be taxed a self-employment tax. So if the income is clearly marked as other income, put it as such, other income, not a self-employment income. Okay? Kasi pag nilagay niyo yan sa Schedule C, that will be subjected to a self-employment tax. At malaki yung self-employment tax, 15.3%. Right? So, yan yung kailangan yung tandaan sa MISC. Yung other income will always be other income. Okay? That's being used in the tax preparation. Next would be a 1099-R. This is for retirement. So box 1 would be for the gross distribution, and then the taxable amount for box 2, and then usually you can see amounts in the federal tax withheld. And then very important in this form is the distribution code, because some distribution is taxable, some is not. Right? And just like any other form, when you enter this into the tax software, just take a cue on the box numbers. Okay? Whatever it is that I'm saying right now could be confusing or could not make sense to you, but that should be okay because it will make more sense once we start entering these forms into the tax software. And 1099S. All right, 1099R is also one of the most common document that you will encounter as a tax preparer. What are the cases where clients or taxpayers get a 1099-R? It's a distribution form, okay? So remember that Americans, they have retirement accounts, and it's very common for an American to invest in a retirement account. Could be an IRA, could be a Roth IRA, could be a 401k for if you're employed by a good company. And so there are occasions about retirement fund or retirement account is meant for your retirement, right? So retirement is usually about 60 or 65 years old. But there are cases wherein taxpayers will withdraw from the retirement account, right? It could be for sickness, it could be to buy a house, it could be for tuition, it could be for whatever, right? So when they withdraw from the retirement account, they will get a 1099-R from their broker. Okay, so saying that this much amount of money was withdrawn from this account during the year, right? And then the reason for that distribution or withdrawal will be stated on box 7, which is the distribution code. So the code, there's a lot of codes there. Could be box code 1, 2, 3. Normal distribution is 7, right? So you'll see 7 a lot. And that could tell you what type of distribution it was. Okay, and you can search it out, search it on the internet what those distribution codes are. And it's very important that you fill that out because the software will then determine the taxability of that distribution. You know what I mean? Kasi kung hindi nilagay yung distribution code dyan, which is the common mistake for new taxpayers, the software will not calculate correctly the tax related to that distribution. Okay? So yun lang yung peculiarity on the 1099-R is be very, very careful to input the code on box 7. Okay? Clear naman, no? Again, 1099-R retirement account, you get a 1099-R when you get a distribution from your retirement account. I think we have a question. What if, Coach, ni-rent mismo ng business ni client yung property for warehouse ng business niya? Then din po i-report yung income ng rent. If it was your business, that was renting the property, you're not running a property management company, right? So walang 1099 MISC doon, Queenie, right? So usually it's just, in internal record ng client, ng business. And it is very common yung business ay mag-rent sa personal property ni wait, kasi medyo complex na yung situation na I was gonna get into. So, or shall I discuss that? We'll wait na lang for another session related to this. But may mga cases like that na yung taxpayer ay may business, right? At yung business niya, ni-rent ang personal property ni owner. Possible yung ganun. Kasi it's a tax strategy. Ang tanong ni Queenie is, kung ganyan na situation, may marireceive ang 1099 MISC si client from his own business kasi nga ni-rent ni business yung personal property niya. The answer is most likely no. Kasi nga si business hindi naman engage, kung ang business ay hindi naman engage in property management, then walang MISC na kailangan i-provide si business to the personal account ni client. There's no threshold on personal rental income. Residential, commercial will still not taxable basta wala pong. I'm not sure what the question is, Alma. It's kind of confusing. You may want to rephrase that. But residential or commercial rent has something to do with 1099 MISC. Yung 1099R naman is retirement.
Ay, sorry po.
So there,
Nagkamali ng type. Dapat MI miscellaneous po pala. R is for
there's
retirement, di ba po? Oh, sorry.
no problem. There's no threshold on personal rental income. I'm not. What do you mean threshold for reporting? Like an amount that needs to be reported?
Yes
Kasi
po.
if that's
Kasi
a
dito sa Philippines, kasi like, for instance, if you have a residential property for rent, let's say 20,000 monthly, that's non-taxable. Parang ganun po.
okay, I got you. I think sa Philippines, if I'm not mistaken, pag yung rental income, residential rental income is 15,000 and below, it's non-taxable. Kahit ilang pang units yan, right? At least that's what I know. In the US, walang threshold na ganun. So if you have an income kahit magkano lang yan, if you receive a 1099 MISC for that income, you'll have to declare that. Or kahit hindi man wala mang 1099 MISC, but you were engaged in a rental business, Airbnb, or an arrangement between you and the taxpayer and the kung sino man nag-rent nun, that has to be declared to the IRS. Walang threshold. That's a simple answer to the question po. Classified po ba yun has home office? I think, Geraldine, you're referring to the question of Queenie. Yes, home office yan. I mean, depende. Depende kung ginamit as home office yung rent. But yeah, most of the time, if nire-rent ni business yung personal space ni taxpayer, that could be classified as home office. When preparing taxes for a client who worked as self-employed and the client gave you an Excel file listing all their expenses, is it safe to rely on just Excel file? What supporting documents should you request from the client for those expenses? Generally, if they give you an Excel file, you take it as it is, right? So P&L format, for example, nalagay niya rental income, or sorry, not rental income, self-employment income, and then he lists down all the expenses. Generally, we take that. We don't usually ask for supporting documents because he can keep that, and if he gets audited, yung firm hindi naman yung ina-audit, yung taxpayer. So that taxpayer is required to submit the supporting documents to the IRS. And usually supporting documents ng mga expenses are bank statements. Kasi if you have a business, usually you will have to open a separate bank account. That's only for the business. Right? Kaya nga, mayroong EIN. The EIN is what they use to open a bank account solely for business purposes. And that bank statement can already be a really good supporting document to the business expenses. The IRS would not require anymore the actual receipts. The bank statement would suffice. But of course, the receipts are good. That's why minsan sa I think there's a feature in QuickBooks that stores the receipts ng mga purchases. The client can take a photo of the receipt and it gets attached to QuickBooks and some other accounting software for their own purposes. But for the taxpayers or tax preparers purposes, we don't usually request those documents anymore. Yeah. Yeah. So may mga thank you guys for sharing. May mga document or mga automated software that store receipts. But then again, on the part of the tax preparer, we appreciate the receipts, but we don't really require them. Okay, good question, guys. I love it. Let's move on. And 1099-S is for proceeds from real estate transactions. So when a taxpayer sell their house or one of their houses, if they have more than one, they would get from their broker S. Okay, so this would give you information as to when was the date of sale, how much was the proceeds from that sale, the address of the property, and stuff. Now, when entering 1099-S, you may need more information that's not available on the form itself, like the basis of the property that was sold. So we will tackle that in another lesson as to how you can get the cost of the property that was sold if the client is not able to provide it, especially if it was purchased for a number of years already, and the client may have already lost track of the closing statement. Closing statement is it's given to the buyer of a property. There's a website that we go to, which is www.trello or Zillow.com. We just type in the address of the property, and then it's going to show us the history of that property. So the history would show us the purchase cost of that property, at a certain time. So that's 1099-S, and then so that's about it for this lesson. All right, 1099-S, again, it's a document when the client sell a real property, usually a house, right? So we'll probably cover in another session yung exceptions pag primary house yung benenta, because this is also a tax strategy, guys, wherein and it happens a lot in the US because they move a lot, right? Like people from California, they move to Texas, or they move to Utah, or people from, like, for example, Jeff Bezos, diba? Or correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was Jeff Bezos who moved from Washington State to Florida, right? Because I don't know, for whatever reason, he wants to retire in Florida. And that happens a lot. People who's tired of the winter, they move to either California or to Florida. And what they do is they sell their primary house, and provided qualified sila dun sa mga provision in selling a primary house, they may not pay tax on the capital gain, right? Kung masyadong malaki yung capital gain, They're kung married, I think there's about 500,000 of gain that is non-taxable. Pag single naman, about 250. Pero may mga requirements yun. So that's one reason why they would sell their houses and buy another one. And then there are also cases wherein you get a 1099-S, but you don't know what the cost was of the property. Right? Kasi sabi ni taxpayer, sabihin ni taxpayer sa'yo, I bought that property 10, 15 years ago, or maybe 20 years ago. It was too long ago. I don't have a copy of the closing statement anymore. Do you need to worry? No, you don't, because you can go to a website called Zillow, where you just type in the address and you will see there the history of that property. You can get there the cost of the property from when it was bought. And you can use that document to enter into the tax software the cost of the property and then the selling price, which you will get from the 1099-S, and then the software can calculate for you the capital gain. Okay, so that's the peculiarity of a 1099-S. Is it common? Not so much. I would say 1 out of 10. So it's not very common. But when you encounter this, there are things that you need to research on, right? So is this going to be qualified for the capital gain exemption? Do you have the historical costs and stuff like that? So marami kang consideration to there are a lot of things you need to consider when you receive a 1099-S. My experience when I get one for the first time was that I was surprised. Like, what's a 1099-S, right? I have to use, of course, my best friend Perplexity for it. Because again, it's not that common. All right, so that's about it for the material. 9 minutes, ginawa natin 1 hour. But let's go to your questions. In filling up general info of the taxpayer, Coach, what are the specific documents we need to look at to determine if the taxpayer dependent has health coverage? We don't really ask that in terms of tax in the tax preparation. Hold on, meron pala, because some state like California and even New Jersey, they require taxpayers to have a health insurance. So meron yan sa tax organizer. It's part of the questionnaire if the taxpayer bought an insurance, health insurance from a marketplace. And usually what they would send us is a form 1095A, 1095B, and a 1095C. Yung 1095B and C, we don't really input that into the software, but yung 1095A, we need that because there's a specific provision in the tax software that would ask you to enter information on a 1095A. Kasi pag 1095A, the taxpayer will pay a premium on the health care on the broker, and then the government will subsidize it by way of premium tax credit. So at the end of the year, mayroong reconciliation na nangyayari, like how much was the total amount of premiums paid and how much how much should it have been based on the income of the taxpayer, at how much was the subsidized provided by the government. So yung 1095A would either result in a premium tax credit, or it could be an additional tax. It depends. Kasi kung sumobra yung tax subsidy ni government, kailangan ibalik yun ni taxpayer. Right? So that will add up to the taxpayer's tax due. Yeah, so yun, 1095A. Good question, Geraldine. Nora, PTL po, coach. Yeah, no problem po. I know it's been more than an hour. But we're 52. Amazing. Coach, do we also account for 1099K for online platforms? Yes, we do. The 99K, that's what we report on a 1099C. We'll cover 1099K when we touch the Schedule C. Okay. But yes, we account for that. Right. So just like that, we've reached our 1 hour session. But for those who are staying now, I know like last night, my time, I shared with you some documents that which I needed you to input into the tax software for practice. And I saw that some of you have already done that. For those who haven't, that's fine. No, you can enter that one later. And this is where I want your participation, okay? Because again, we're a community, and I don't like, just it's just me talking. I would like your participation as well, right? So I would appreciate volunteers. And as much as possible, I want to hear from you because that's how I also get to know you, right? So where am I getting at? So where am I getting at is for tomorrow, I need a volunteer. Okay? Maybe volunteers who will show their screen and share with us how they enter the tax documents that I've shared in the tax software. So we can discuss this probably offline, but I believe there were 9 documents I shared in the Google Drive. So there's the tax organizer, and then there were 1099s. Okay. So I need a volunteer who would enter a tax organizer in the tax software, walk us through how you do it. Okay. So share your screen, unmute yourself, and then show it to us how you do it. And then maybe another one for the 1099 INT, another one for the 1099R, stuff like that. Okay, we don't decide who will do it now because it will probably take time, and probably some of you would be too shy to do it. But we'll discuss it offline via the group chat. Okay, and we'll do it tomorrow. So before we start tomorrow, we should have already a list of those who will be sharing or who will be doing the screen share. If there's a lot of you who will volunteer, which will be a good thing, we'll probably do some raffle, or I don't know how you do this thing where you randomly select the person para lang objective tayo. But kung unfortunate naman na wala masyadong mag-volunteer, pwede naman na kahit isang tao lang for the entire 9 documents tomorrow. I don't mind. But what I'm just hoping to see is, there would be a start. This would be a start of a participative, and oh, thank you, Geraldine. Appreciate that. And we're looking for more volunteer. Baka kasi si Geraldine lang yung the entire. Okay, Minerva also is volunteering. Oh, good job. A lot of you are volunteering. So we'll discuss that offline. I'll get Zara to get all your names for those who would volunteer. Chat na lang din tayo. So yeah, that's again how I get to know you. And again, guys, the more that we share, the more that we learn, diba? So yun. May question ba kayo? Clarification? I guess clear naman yun, ano? So we'll do that moving forward. We'll make the course as participative and interactive as possible. Kasi alam ko sa inyo dito meron na kayong mga experience, 'di ba? So maganda yung nagko-collaborate tayo. Alrighty. So I guess I'll just want to take the time to share with you some things that tawag dito. Interesting things that I would want to share with you. So we've had this conversation with, actually not a conversation, with Sam and Kendall of Wita. Most of you have already known them. So apparently they have a big plan for the Philippines. They really want to they want to really want to they really want to build a big firm in the Philippines, right? So Sam, being a CPA who worked for PwC, I'm not sure if you know PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, one of the big four in the auditing world. So he was an auditor. So he knows how the big four works. Kendall is someone who dislikes the corporate America, right? So in the course of our discussion, there were a lot of disagreements, guys. As in, a lot of disagreement na parang nag-aaway na sila. But that's how Americans work, right? Even if you could be the closest best friends, but when it comes to ideas, opinions, talagang paanohan kayo. I would say, I don't have the right term for it, but during the course of our discussion, ganun na nangyari. Medyo tumaas yung temperature. And ako naman din ako napatalo. Nakipag-argue din ako. Charet. Because I like that kind of environment, where pataasan kayo ng opinion. Hindi ego, ha, but opinion. And in the end, you agree on one thing. Diba? So, kunyari, there was this discussion on how they want to structure the roles, right? So Sam would say, "Oh, we'll start with first year associate, second year associate, third year associate," because he got that from his Big Four experience. Kendall doesn't like it. I don't like the word associate. I don't like these things and stuff. And then I was like, I don't have an experience with the Big Four, but I know how it works. And I'm kind of leaning towards Kendall because I also don't like the idea of labeling people. So I was just listening. And then at some point, I understood this is what Sam would want to achieve. This is what Kendall would want to achieve. And I was kind of in the middle. And then I told, yeah, I think I like the idea of when you come into the firm, you already have a good picture of where you're currently at and what's your career progression is going to be like. So for example, you come into the firm, first year, no experience, right? So you'll probably come in as first year data entry. But because you know that the organization is structured in a way that if you do very well in a role, you will have 2 or 3 years to progress as a senior, right? Because that's how it works in a company. You already have that clarity in your head that if you give it your best, 3 years would be the maximum time you'll spend as a junior, because after that, you'll move up to a senior position. But if you do very, very well, then in a matter of 2 years, you can get promoted to a senior position. You know what I'm saying? And I told Kendall that, the benefit of that, Kendall, is there is clarity in the career progression of someone who joins the organization. And so then, parang medyo nagkaroon ng parang middle ground. So that was kind of the dynamics that we had on one of the discussion. And again, that discussion was centered on growing a team in the Philippines. Because one thing I like about Wita is that they can afford, they can afford to build a team. They can afford to, they're even thinking of buying firms, but Kendall is against the idea. So they're going to be likely building it from scratch because, which is probably not a problem. Yeah, I don't think it is going to be a problem because they're well connected. They revolve around, I would say it's easy for them to obtain clients, right? So why am I sharing this with you? Again, because this could be an opportunity for you. Maybe not for all, because some of you would probably go to another firm, which is fine. I've seen some posts in the community for people or firms hiring tax preparers. Although nakalagay doon 4 years yung experience, grabe naman. Which is what we're battling, right? Yung experience na requirement. Na kahit wala kayong experience, kaya niyong mag-apply. May lakas loob kayong mag-apply because, again, after this course, both personal and individual, I would want everybody of you to come to a prospect employer and say, hey, I may not have any experience, but I went through a very good training, so much that I can confidently say I can prepare a return. And to prove that, provide me documents or, scenarios, and I can prepare a return right here, right now. I can share with you my screen. I open up ProConnect. I'll show you how to prepare a return. You know what I mean? That's how you will combat the experience requirement. You know what I mean? Because truth of the matter is, when a firm is looking for a tax preparer, for one, there is not enough talent in the Philippines yet, right? And if they're looking for someone with 4 years experience, that someone could probably be working elsewhere, right? So, if you're an experienced tax preparer, you would probably not be looking for any other job, right? Because, so there's really is a shortage. And if someone is posting in a platform that they're looking for a tax preparer, they would likely not get someone who has the experience. Again, because most of those experience are already working, right? They would probably be kung meron mang naghahanap ng work na may experience, they're probably looking for a higher pay, right? A higher pay. But, they're not actively looking. So what these firms that are, these firms that are looking for tax preparers, unless they're looking for someone seasoned, they may be able to get one from the people who are already working as tax preparers. But if itong mga firms na to ay naghahanap ng preparers in the Philippines because, they want to have someone at a more affordable rate, right? Kasi especially kung starting pa lang din naman na tax firm, they cannot most likely afford those with experience. Diba? Kasi may iba mag-offer ng ganitong amount, a rate for a tax preparer, pero yung hinahanap pang na 4 years experience, hindi niya naman afford. Diba? You know what I mean? So ito yung budget niya, pero ito yung requirement niya. So mas napakalawak ng gap. Diba? So this is where your opportunity comes in, right? Because you can come into someone looking for a tax preparation role, and since beginning pa lang din naman kayo, you can I don't think you would ever you could demand a premium rate yet, but it will come. Trust me, it will come. But for you to get into the job, yung paying job, hindi yung internship na free. Yung actual job is that, syempre, you will have to negotiate your rate, diba? And you would not ask for an unreasonable rate because you would likely need that job to, one, get an experience, right? And really learn as you go along. So 1 year, okay lang yan. Ask for a reasonable rate. Again, yung reasonable rate, hindi yung kung 20 years ka na sa industry, right? In the accounting or whatever industry you belong to, and you're thinking of switching to a tax preparation career or a career in the U.S. tax, of course, there will be some middle ground. Like if you're already earning 6 digits in the corporate world, but you're sick of the 8 to 5 job, you're sick of political or bureaucracy in the workplace, and a whole other stuff, right? And you want freedom. You want to work from anywhere and anytime, right? So if you say 6 digit ka na, and then when you're starting to look for a tax preparation role, kasi nag-attend ka sa course na to and you feel like you're ready, and from a 6 digit, medyo bumaba ka, right? Let's say, I'm thinking on top of my head, let's say, as a beginner, on the average, I would say, on the average, could go lower, could be higher, but I would say on the average, if you're a tax preparer, walang experience, a reasonable US tax firm would probably price you at 50K, right? So 50K for a start. I don't know if that's bad or if it's good, but if you're someone already on the 20-year experience in the Philippines, having a corporate job, you'll probably be earning 6 digits. So 50K might be on a lower end for you. Can you negotiate? Yes, of course. It's open for negotiation. But to me, in my personal opinion, it's not too bad. Because if I know I'm really good at what I do, 50K is just for a start. It's better than starting as a free intern. Because merong ganon, free intern for 6 months, as in walang bayad, right? So 50K is, for me, a reasonable rate for a beginner, right? But again, that's on the average. May mga firm na nag-offer a lot more than that. And there are also firms who offer a lot less than that. Doon na papasok yung negotiation skills nyo, right? But for someone who's working in the corporate world for like the first 5 years, I don't think 50K is on the lower end. Kasi I know mayroong mga corporate workers earning 20K, 30K, maybe even less, especially if you're in the province. But what I can tell you based on experience is that once you get into the tax preparation job, yung 6 digit, guys, if you do a really good job and you learn a lot, you provide value to your client, 6 digit is like 2 years. You can get 6 digits in 2 years. Why do I say this confidently? Because I've seen it from myself. A lot of my mentees, yung nag-work na sa akin before and who were able to get a client of their own, are now earning 6 digits. And you can go and search them, for all I care, to verify my claim. But some of them are already earning 6 digits, right? And I told them, two of them, I told them, because I was really impressed with, how they work, their comm skills. I told them, you know what, guys, malayo yung 2 years, magkaka 6 digit kayo. And it really happened, right? Because they were really good. I know they were really good. If they go to an interview, they will impress an employer and they will get hired because that's how good they were. So yeah, yun sana nga ba ako patungo sa talk na to? Bakit na tayo napunta sa rate? Tingnan muna natin yung chat room. What can be a reasonable rate? Yeah, I think I've answered it, sir. What can be a reasonable beginner answer tax coach? Yeah. What will be the worst case of 50K? Good question. 50K. I can't really answer on that because it varies. May mga firm that really require you to work US hours, like monitored hours. Depends, diba? In US, may 4 time zones: Eastern, Central, Mountain, and Pacific. And based on experience, yung mga tax firms ay nasa East, most likely New York. Kapag Eastern time, 12 hours difference lang. just like where I am right now, because I'm in Montreal. We're in the eastern side. So right now it's 9:21 a.m. my time. That's 9:21 p.m. your time. There's a 12-hour difference. Pag Pacific, which is California, ang dami ding firms in California, 14 hours naman difference. Tama ba? 13 pala ngayon kasi daylight savings time. So right now in California, it's I don't know, 6 a.m. I think. Yeah, 6 a.m. 6:22 a.m. in California. So ganun yung time difference. So may mga firms that they require you to work their hours. And the reason for that is they want the team to be responsive. Okay? Now what I can tell you with WITA is Sam and Kendall do not like their people to be working same hours. So meron lang nire-require na 3 hours overlap, right? 3 hours overlap. Kendall is working Pacific because she's in San Diego. Sam is working in Colorado, so he's mountain. So 3 hours overlap yung nire-require, but they're not really doing micromanagement, and that's what I like about them. And based on our discussion, a lot of you, if you end up working for Wita, you will not be working with them. You will be working for me, right? So, and I'm telling you right now, as someone who manages people, I also don't like micromanagement. I like macromanagement. I don't micromanage. I'm more of output, right? And I'm more of character, right? Character and then competence. Character, because if you say you will deliver at this time of the day, you will deliver, right? And if you cannot deliver, you will tell me ahead of time. And mind you, I've worked with very, very, very difficult people in the past. I've been an assistant to a very demanding CFO for a very big company in Saudi. So, alam niyo yung film na The Devil Wears Prada? I can totally relate to that because like my boss was like the was like the Miranda. He was this guy, but he was French, right? And you know French are so demanding, they're so particular, they're so meticulous. And I was the character of Anne Hathaway. Although because I had really good training, I was not this guy na push over lang. I would always be assertive. So at one point, I would tell my boss, because my boss would tell, we were on a first name basis. I was 22 then, and he was 60 plus, I think. And when I was working for him initially a few weeks, he would tell me, Chris, you're wasting my time with these silly questions. You ask too many questions, and you know how expensive my time is. And I would tell him, I know that, Paul, but I would rather waste your time now than waste your time later. Because I'm not gonna go out of this room unless I fully understand your instructions. And he said, makes sense, right? He told me that. And again, I was 22 years old that time. I was so assertive because in the first few weeks of us working together, ang dami kong mali. Kasi pala mali yung pagkakaintindi ko sa instructions niya. Right? So I would come into his office, providing him with all these documents and all answers that I thought were correct, end up wrong. Right? And I felt so inefficient. I felt so stupid. And so I have to rethink my strategy. How can I improve? Right? So then, every time I go to his room, I will not go out of that door unless he answers my question with a yes or a no. So before I go, I would tell him, Paul, just to summarize everything, this is what you want me to do. Blah, 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 blah. Is it a yes or a no? If he says no, that means there's something wrong in my understanding. But once he says yes, then I'm going to go out that door. So that's the kind of working environment I was exposed to. Very democratic, very assertive. And also there is, I would say, accountability, right? So if you're asked to do this thing, and when you're new, when you're young, you don't know a lot of things, right? So if I'm given a task before, I would say, oh, this is something I have not done before. It may take me time because I will have to see how it works, right? When do you need this? So I will ask my boss, when do you need this? If he says, I need it by the end of the day. And when I look at the task, if I'm doubtful already that I can deliver at the end of the day, I would already set a good expectation. To say, this is something new. I don't think I can deliver it by the end of the day today. Is there someone else you can ask to do it instead? Because even if I would give it my best, I'm very sure I cannot deliver end of the day. You know what I mean? I'm not saying no. It's just that given my skills and my experience, I really cannot deliver at the end of the day. Right? So doon pa lang, alam na ng nag-ask sa akin to do something that I cannot deliver. Right? But sometimes I would say, okay, I'll look into it. I'll see if I can do it by the end of the day. But if I feel that at the end of the day, I cannot deliver, middle of the day pa lang, sasabihan ako na. Right? If you need, let's say, 5 p.m., 12 noon, I would already tell you if I can deliver it by 5 p.m. And that way you have time to have it delegated to someone else who can do it in a shorter time. You know what I mean? So I'm just telling you this is because that's the kind of environment I'm working at. And some of the people that are in this room, they're already working for me, and they can attest that I don't micromanage at all. We use the CRM very, very well enough so that when there is a task given, we're expected that those tasks are done on the time agreed or the time expected, and then we don't meet that often, in fact, because I also don't like meetings, actually. There's a lot of platforms that you can use in order for you to check on each other's work, communicate, even at a different time zone, even if at a different time. But that's, again, where character comes into play, right? And character is something that, it's inherent in the person, not something that you can teach, right? Only competence you can teach, but it's very easy to teach competence if the character is there. Because even if you have the character, even if you have the competence, but if your character is corrupt, in my personal view, I really can't work with someone with. I'm not saying that I have the best character, but we have our own, right? And we normally work with people with the same set of values, same set of character, right? And normally you would know it at the onset if the person is not within the values that you also observe. So ganun lang. That's where corporate values also play a very important role, because for someone to be able to say that I would want to belong in this organization is for them to know what this organization values, right? Because sometimes, like, you're in an organization and you feel like, oh, this is an organization who does not value people, then I'm out. It happened to me many times when I got into a company and right at the onset, I didn't feel like I didn't belong. Then I went out, right? So that's a culture, correct, Geraldine? That's a culture fit. So it really plays a lot of a factor. And what Sam and Kendall are trying to build is a really good culture that I was also very interested to buy into.
Meet our free U.S. tax preparation course brought to you by the Borderless Accountant. We are inviting you to join our community. Live training, reputable tax firms as resource speakers, recorded, replayable at higit sa lahat, libre. To join, like and follow our official Facebook page, join our Facebook group for important updates, and fill out our Google form to be included in our mailing list. See you there!